Welcome to Learn English with Sara. Thank you for joining me for another Learn English Through Story episode. Today I'll guide you through a classic tale rewritten in smooth, clear English so you can enjoy the story while improving your listening and vocabulary skills. So relax, sit comfortably, and let's begin our journey. Once upon a time in a distant kingdom surrounded by mountains and rolling green fields, there lived a king and a queen whose lives seemed perfect from the outside. The king was known everywhere for his warmth and kindness. Whenever he walked through the town at 9:00 a.m. or 3:00 p.m., children waved at him and shopkeepers bowed politely because he always treated everyone with respect. But although the king was the face of the kingdom, the true power behind the throne was actually his wife, the queen. Before becoming queen, she had lived a very different life. She once worked in the castle kitchen, carefully chopping vegetables and washing pots until her hands were wrinkled from hot water. She was poor, but she was also clever, funny, and surprisingly good at Scrabble. The king fell in love with her quick wit and charming smile, and soon after he married her and made her queen. From that moment on, she held enormous influence in the palace. But even with all her power, the queen carried a secret fear, the fear of losing everything. She worried that somewhere in the world there might be a woman more beautiful than she was, someone the king might admire more. This fear lived quietly inside her, growing stronger with every passing day. The queen kept a magic mirror in her private room, a mirror that saw all things and never lied. Every morning, no matter how early, she stood before it. At around 7:30 a.m., she would touch the cool glass frame and ask softly, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of all?" And the mirror always answered, "You are my queen. You are the most beautiful woman in the world." Those words were like a warm blanket around her heart, calming her fears, keeping her world in balance. But one morning, everything changed. She stood before the mirror as usual, her hands steady, her voice confident. "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of all?" The mirror flickered with light, paused, and then replied, "You are very beautiful, my queen. But the most beautiful woman in the world is Snow White." The queen felt the ground shift beneath her. "Snow White," she whispered. "Who is this Snow White?" The mirror replied, "Snow White works in the castle kitchen. She has hair as black as night, lips as red as roses, and skin as white as snow. And as of 8:00 a.m. this morning, she is a tiny bit more beautiful than you." The queen's breath trembled. Jealousy rushed into her heart like a winter storm. She stomped her feet, pulled at her hair, and cried out, "I will lose everything." Her fear hardened into something sharp and cold. She summoned a trusted hunter into her chamber. He entered quietly, bowing deeply. Without looking away from her mirror, she spoke, "Find the girl Snow White. Take her far into the darkest part of the forest. She must never come back." When she finally turned her eyes toward him, the hunter felt a chill run through his spine. Her command was final. Obediently, the hunter found Snow White that same morning in the kitchen, cleaning a wooden table. She greeted him with a smile, unaware of the queen's plan. He led her deeper and deeper into the forest until they reached a place where sunlight barely touched the ground. And there, with a trembling voice, he told her the truth: "Run, run far, and do not return." Then he disappeared among the trees, leaving her alone. Snow White stood in the silent forest, her heart pounding. Rain began falling lightly through the leaves, soaking her hair and clothes. She looked around and whispered to herself, "I can't go home, but I can't stay here either." Gathering all her courage, she started running. She ran across a shallow stream, up a rocky hill, and down into a dark valley. By midday, her pale skin was scratched, her legs aching. By late afternoon, mud clung to her dress. With each hour, she looked less like the beautiful girl from the castle kitchen, and more like a lost traveler fighting to survive. Just when exhaustion threatened to stop her completely, she smelled wood smoke. She followed it through the trees and found a small cottage glowing warmly from inside. Desperate for shelter, she knocked. No one answered. She whispered, "Hello, is anyone home?" Still silence. Slowly, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. And this is where her unexpected journey truly began. Snow White stepped quietly into the cottage, unsure if she was welcome, but too exhausted to turn back into the dark forest. The room was surprisingly cozy. A fire crackled gently, as if it had been waiting for someone to arrive. 7 tiny chairs stood around a wooden table that was covered with unwashed dishes, crumbs, and half-finished meals. Everything inside looked lived in yet strangely small, as though the owners were miniature versions of ordinary people. Her stomach growled softly. She had not eaten since early morning, and her hands trembled from hunger. She found a loaf of bread on the table and hesitated for a moment before whispering, "I'm sorry," and taking a small bite. The taste felt like pure relief. She finished the entire loaf, then found a bottle of milk and drank every drop. When she finally sat before the fire, warmth flowed through her bones, pulling her gently toward sleep. Before she could resist, her eyes closed, and she drifted into a deep, peaceful rest. Hours later, Snow White woke to the sound of whispering. 7 small figures stood around her, each no taller than her waist. Their eyes were wide with curiosity, confusion, and in one case, mild annoyance. Snow White sat up, startled. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "This is our house," one of them said in a high, squeaky voice. He crossed his tiny arms. "Who are you?" Another dwarf nudged him. "Don't yell at her. She looks frightened." A third dwarf hid behind a chair. "She's enormous." "Of course I'm scared." Snow White placed her hands together. "Please, I didn't mean to scare you or to enter without permission. I had nowhere else to go." Her voice cracked as the memories of the day rushed back. "I cannot return to the castle." The dwarfs exchanged quick whispers, then gathered in a huddle. Their little heads leaned together as they spoke in soft bursts. After a few minutes, they turned back to her. The dwarf who had first yelled at her cleared his throat. "You may stay," he said, "but only if you help us wash the dishes. We hate washing dishes." Snow White managed her first tired smile of the day. "It's a deal." And just like that, she found a new home in the forest. Every morning around 6:30 a.m., she washed the dishes after breakfast, humming softly as sunlight spilled into the cottage. Every morning as the dwarfs prepared for work, they repeated the same careful warning. "Be careful. Don't open the door for anyone. And thank you for washing the dishes. We really, truly hate washing dishes." Meanwhile, back at the castle, the queen felt her confidence return. She believed Snow White was gone, forever removed from her life, like a bad dream. When the king called up the stairs asking, "Would you like to play Scrabble with me?" she replied, "Maybe later, dearest," because she had something more important to do. She stood before her magic mirror once again. Magic mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of all. The mirror hesitated before answering, "You are very beautiful, my queen, but Snow White is the most beautiful woman in the world." The queen froze. "Snow White is alive," she whispered. "Yes," the mirror replied. "She is living with the 7 dwarfs in the forest. As of 100 p.m. today, she is more beautiful than you." The queen's face twisted with rage. "This cannot be." She rushed to her closet, grabbed her old coat and boots, and stormed out of the palace. She climbed into her fastest carriage and ordered the driver to take her deep into the forest. Her jealousy had now grown into something dangerous, pushing her toward the darkest parts of herself. By late afternoon, Snow White was resting near the fire, reading a small book she had borrowed from one of the dwarfs. The cottage felt peaceful, safe, almost like a new beginning. That is, until she heard a loud knock. Knock, knock. Snow White froze. She tiptoed toward the window and peeked outside. A woman stood there with a basket of colorful fruit. Her face was beautiful, but her dress and boots looked old and worn. "Fruit, fresh fruit. Apples and bananas and pears and oranges," the woman called. Snow White's eyes softened. "I haven't had fruit in so long," she whispered. The woman looked up and saw her. "Hello, dear, would you like some fruit? I have delicious apples today." Snow White hesitated. "I love apples, but I'm not supposed to open the door for anyone. Those apples might be poisoned." "Oh, how silly," the woman said with a kind laugh. She cut the apple in half. "See, I'll eat one half and you may eat the other. That way you'll know it's safe." Snow White looked again. The apple glimmered with tempting juiciness. The woman took a bite, chewing happily. Snow White felt her resolve melt. She opened the door, slowly accepted the other half, and took a large bite. Within seconds, she collapsed to the floor. Snow White's body hit the wooden floor before she even understood what was happening. Her vision blurred, her breath thinned, and the warm glow of the cottage faded into darkness. The queen stood over her, finally dropping the soft, friendly expression she had worn only moments before. A quiet sigh of satisfaction escaped her lips. She slipped out of the cottage, stepped into her carriage, and ordered the driver to return to the castle at once. Her heart felt strangely light, as though she believed she had finally secured the beauty she feared losing. When the dwarfs returned home around 600 p.m., they walked through the forest laughing about their day, each one complaining about something small, heavy tools, long hours, or a rude squirrel who had refused to move off the path. But when they opened the door to their cottage, their laughter died instantly. Snow White lay motionless on the floor. They rushed to her side, shouting her name, shaking her shoulders, splashing cold water on her face, even tickling her feet in desperation. But nothing worked. Her breath did not return. Her skin did not warm. One dwarf whispered, "Is she gone?" Another answered with a trembling voice, "She does not seem alive." The dwarfs gathered through the night hearts, heavy, discussing what to do. They could not bury her because she still looked so peaceful, as though she might open her eyes at any moment. Instead, they built a glass coffin with their own tiny hands, polishing it until it shone like crystal. They carried it into a beautiful part of the forest where sunlight streamed through the leaves and flowers bloomed in every color. They placed Snow White inside, surrounding her with blossoms so fragrant they could be smelled from several steps away. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed as Snow White lay unmoving inside the glass coffin through warm spring mornings, hot summer afternoons, cool autumn evenings, and quiet winter nights. Birds perched near her singing softly, as if keeping her company. Animals visited, curious and gentle. Even the winds seemed to whisper around her instead of blowing harshly. The dwarfs visited daily around 500 p.m., brushing leaves from the glass, speaking to her as if she could still hear them. Meanwhile, in the castle, the queen walked with a new sense of victory. She believed her plan had finally worked. She smiled more, played Scrabble with the king, and admired her reflection without fear. Yet a small tension still lingered beneath her calm, a faint whisper of uncertainty that made her check the mirror again and again. One night after dinner, around 8:00 p.m., she returned to her chamber and stood before her magic mirror once more. "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of all?" she asked. The mirror responded, "You are very beautiful, my queen, but Snow White is again the most beautiful woman in the world." The queen's scream echoed through the castle. "What, that cannot be! Snow White is gone!" But the mirror could not lie. The queen's rage returned sharper than ever, twisting her thoughts until even the mirror seemed like an enemy. In wild fury, she grabbed a shoe and threw it with all her strength. The glass shattered into 1,000 shining pieces, scattering across the room like falling stars. And in that moment, the magic inside the mirror broke free. The queen gasped as a wave of glittering light rushed past her. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the cold floor. As she fell into a deep, heavy sleep, she began to dream a dream more vivid than anything she had ever experienced. In the dream, she found herself in a grand hall with crowds staring at her. She wore iron shoes that glowed red with heat. Before she could take them off, music began to play, forcing her to dance. Her feet burned with every step. She cried out for help, but the dance continued. She spun and jumped and twisted, unable to stop the agony building until she thought she could bear no more. Just when she felt she might collapse forever, a voice whispered through the darkness, "Wake up." The queen opened her eyes. Morning sunlight slipped gently into her chamber. Her heart raced as she touched her feet, grateful to feel no pain. For the first time in years, she felt quiet. The jealousy that had controlled her was gone. The broken mirror no longer whispered doubts into her mind. She felt strangely free, almost light again. She rose from the floor and walked downstairs searching for the king. When she found him, she gave him a small smile and said, "Would you like to play Scrabble?" He looked pleasantly surprised and gladly agreed. But far away in the forest, something unexpected was happening. Deep in the forest, the seasons continued their quiet rotation. The dwarfs had grown used to their routine, working during the day, then visiting Snow White every evening, brushing leaves from her coffin, and speaking to her as if she might still answer. Even though her chest never lifted with breath, even though her hands remained still, they refused to believe her story had truly ended. Hope, it seemed, was stronger than loss. One bright afternoon near the end of winter, when tiny green buds were already forming on the branches, a young prince from a distant kingdom wandered through the forest with his loyal dog. He had traveled far from home in search of adventure and peace, wishing to escape the constant duties of palace life. Around 2:30 p.m., as the prince explored a narrow path filled with wildflowers, his dog suddenly darted ahead, barking excitedly. "Where are you going?" the prince called, laughing as he followed. The dog led him to a clearing the prince had never seen before. Sunlight streamed through the tall trees, casting soft gold across a strange, sparkling object resting on a table made of stone. As he stepped closer, he realized it was a glass coffin. At first he thought his eyes were deceiving him. Inside the coffin lay a young woman with hair as black as midnight lips, as red as roses, and skin as pale as fresh snow. She looked peaceful, almost glowing under the afternoon sun. The prince felt his breath catch. He had heard legends of beauty before, but this was something magical, something he couldn't explain. He moved closer, brushing away a layer of leaves that had gathered on the glass. "Who are you?" he whispered gently, though he knew she could not answer. His dog, excited and unaware of the moment's seriousness, jumped around his feet. When the prince stepped back, the dog bumped into him, causing him to stumble forward. "Wait, no, stop!" the prince cried as he tripped over his dog. His elbow hit the edge of the table. The coffin wobbled dangerously. Before he could steady it, the entire glass structure slid off the surface and crashed onto the soft grass. The prince gasped and rushed to Snow White's side. "Oh no, oh dear, oh, fiddlesticks!" he exclaimed, horrified at what he had done. The coffin lay shattered around her like broken ice. He prepared to apologize endlessly to the dwarfs if they ever found out. But then something unbelievable happened. Snow White's body shifted. A faint sound escaped her throat. A tiny cough, as delicate as the flap of a butterfly's wings. The prince froze. A small piece of apple rolled from her lips onto the grass. The poisonous fragment that had been lodged in her throat for months finally fell free. Snow White coughed again, gasping as if waking from a long, heavy dream. Her eyes fluttered open. The prince stared in complete astonishment. His dog barked once as if celebrating. Snow White blinked at the daylight. "Apples," she whispered hoarsely. "I beg your pardon," the prince asked, bending closer. "No, more apples," she forced out. The prince almost laughed in disbelief. Absolutely understandable. Just then the dwarfs arrived, carrying flowers as they did every day. When they saw Snow White sitting up, they dropped everything and ran toward her with tears streaming down their cheeks. They hugged her, held her hands, touched her hair, and thanked every star in the sky for bringing her back. Snow White smiled weakly, overwhelmed by the love surrounding her. She listened as the dwarfs described how she had remained in the forest for months. They told her how animals had come to watch over her, how the seasons had changed around her, and how they never stopped believing she would return. The prince waited patiently until the dwarfs finished speaking. Then he stepped forward, bowed slightly, and said, "I am very glad you have awakened. I apologize deeply for accidentally throwing you out of your own coffin." Snow White laughed softly, the first laugh she had felt in a very long time. "It seems I owe my life to your clumsiness." The dwarfs invited the prince to the cottage for dinner, eager to celebrate the miracle they had witnessed. And the prince, realizing he had found something meaningful in this quiet forest clearing, accepted with a grateful smile. That evening, under the warm glow of lanterns, the cottage filled with laughter, stories, and joy. Snow White ate heartily, grateful to taste warm soup after so long. The dwarfs cheered every time she took another bite, as though they feared she might disappear again if she didn't continue eating. By the end of the meal, the prince surprised the dwarfs by presenting a gift he had ordered earlier in the day during a visit to a nearby town, a dishwasher. The dwarves screamed with excitement, "We will never wash dishes again." Snow White laughed until tears came to her eyes. But while happiness returned to the forest, the queen was awakening to a very different kind of transformation. That same night, while Snow White celebrated her return to life in the little cottage deep within the forest, the queen awoke in her castle bedroom with the faintest sense of confusion. The dream of the burning iron shoes still clung to her mind like smoke. She sat up slowly, feeling the quiet morning light on her face. For the first time in years, she did not rush to her mirror. In fact, she felt no desire to ask it anything. Her heart felt strangely lighter, as though a heavy door had finally been opened inside her. The king knocked on the door around 7:00 a.m. "My love, are you awake?" "Yes," she answered softly, standing up. She walked toward the door, not to hide anything or pretend, but simply to greet him. He smiled warmly when he saw her and asked, "Would you like to play Scrabble this morning?" For once, she didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, "I would love to." As they sat together moving wooden letters across the board, she realized how much of her life she had spent worrying about a beauty that never needed protection. The broken mirror no longer whispered fear, and with its magic gone, her jealousy dissolved like frost under sunlight. She felt free to be herself, not a perfect queen, not a flawless beauty, just a woman who loved her husband and wanted to rebuild what she had nearly destroyed. In the forest, morning air drifted into the cottage, as Snow White woke surrounded by the scent of warm breakfast and excited chatter. The dwarfs argued about how to use the dishwasher properly, while the prince stood by the door with his dog, trying not to laugh at their enthusiasm. Snow White stretched, feeling stronger than she had since before the poisoned apple. For the first time since running into the forest, her future felt possible again. The dwarfs insisted on accompanying her outside, hovering around her, as though she might fall at any moment. Snow White assured them she was fine, but their protectiveness made her smile. "I'm very lucky to have you," she told them, and every dwarf turned red with embarrassment. Later that day, the prince took a quiet walk with Snow White through the forest. Birds called to one another, and sunlight danced across the leaves. They walked without rushing their steps, soft on the moss-covered ground. Snow White breathed deeply, taking in the scent of pine and earth. For the first time since waking, she let herself feel the weight of everything she had lived through. "I lost so much," she said softly. "My home, my safety. Even myself for a little while." The prince nodded. "And yet you also found something. Friends who love you. A new chance. A life you can choose for yourself." She looked up at him, surprised by the warmth in his voice. "I didn't think anyone would find me," she admitted. "I didn't think I would wake again." He smiled. "Sometimes life returns when we least expect it." They continued walking until they reached a ridge overlooking the forest. The view stretched like an endless sea of green. Snow White closed her eyes, letting the wind touch her cheeks. She felt new, as if the forest had breathed life back into her. Back at the castle, the queen finished her game of Scrabble with the king, feeling calmer than she had in years. A quiet moment passed as she looked out the window toward the forest. Instead of bitterness, she felt a soft kind of regret and the smallest spark of hope that maybe someday she could face the girl she had wronged and apologize. She did not know if that day would ever come, but the emptiness inside her had been replaced by something gentler. Several weeks later, the dwarfs visited the castle to share news that Snow White was alive and well. The king rejoiced, immediately sending gifts and invitations. The queen listened silently, her hands clasped tightly together. Guilt touched her like cold rain. She knew the truth would one day come out and she would have to face it. But for now, she allowed herself a single breath of relief that Snow White lived. Snow White stayed in the forest for some time, finding strength and belonging among her friends. The prince visited often, and their friendship blossomed naturally, built on kindness, curiosity, and quiet understanding. She never rushed to decide her future. Instead, she let her heart heal at its own pace. As seasons passed, Snow White carried with her a lesson the forest had taught her: that darkness cannot silence a soul that still chooses hope, that fear cannot defeat a heart supported by love, and that even the deepest pain can lead to unexpected beginnings. Her journey became a reminder that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it simply whispers, "Keep going." And so Snow White continued her life, not as a frightened girl fleeing danger, but as a young woman who discovered her value beyond beauty, beyond fear, and beyond the shadows that once threatened her. She learned that true strength comes from rising again after the world tries to silence you, and the dwarfs, the prince, and the forest itself stood as proof that love in any form can bring someone back to life. Thank you so much for listening to today's Learn English Through story. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment below.